work. Okay, my name is David Bookbinder, and I'm going to talk to you about the great trade of carbon pricing versus carbon regulations. I've been working on carbon regulations and greenhouse gas regulations for a long, long time. I used to be Sierra Club's Chief Climate Counsel, and I spent a lot of time litigating with the federal government over carbon regulations, proposing carbon regulations, thinking about carbon regulations, etc. And now I spend all my time thinking about carbon pricing. There is no way to get a carbon tax in the United States. And I'm going to refer to carbon tax in lieu of carbon pricing because I'm not a big fan of cap and trade. So I'm just going to talk about carbon tax, which is also good for this audience. You can't get a carbon tax in the United States unless you give enormous ground on regulation with the business community. Conversely, you're not going to get a carbon tax until such time as they feel threatened by regulations. So let's kind of unpack those two rather contradictory statements. You can use the threat of significant federal regulation of carbon to drive industry to the table. But you can't actually do a lot with it once you get there in terms of regulation. Regulation doesn't work all that well for carbon. But you can threaten it. And threatening carbon regulation is something that we pleaded with the Obama administration to do for many years. They ignored it, and in fact did almost no carbon regulation, with the exception of the Clean Power Plan, which they fought. The environmental groups in the states had to sue the Obama administration in order to get the Obama administration to say, yes, we are going to do carbon standards for power plants, which became the Clean Power Plan. But not even the Obama administration liked the idea of regulating CO2. But if you have you're not going to get a price, you're not going to get industry buy-in to a price unless they're threatened with something worse. And regulation can do that because regulation can be extremely expensive and time-consuming, and dare I say, extremely expensive. So the threat of regulation will drive a carbon price. But we don't actually want to do that regulation. We want to, because under the Clean Air Act, you have to regulate source category by source category. You can't just wave a magic wand. First you have to say, let's put aside power plants, steel mills. You have to go through a rulemaking for new steel mills. And then after you get that rule for new steel mills, you have to go back and then do another rule for existing steel mills. And the same thing for aluminum smelters. And the same thing for pulp and paper mills. And the same thing for cement kilns. And there are about 80 or 90 such categories, all of which are overall, with the exception of the power plants, those 80 or 90 categories add up to a lot of emissions, but each category alone does not do that much. And it's a hugely complex process to do even standards for a new source category, and then you go back and then you have to start doing the ones for the existing plants in that source category. And this is a huge regulatory undertaking. And it does not, it does not give you a lot of bang for your buck, simply because all of those source categories are so small, with the exception, as I said, of power plants. And unfortunately, the power plant rule is now dead. And that one's going to be repealed and replaced by something much, much weaker, which is unfortunate. But, so the regulations don't work that well, but the threat of them is something that can drive industry into a carbon price, because the steel industry doesn't want a whole set of regulations on CO2, and the aluminum industry doesn't want a whole set of regulations on CO2, and the cement industry doesn't. But they also know that it will take a while, and you can see that it would take, between doing the new source regulations and then doing the existing source regulations and accounting for the litigation delays and, dare I say, the political risks of a Republican administration coming along and killing the regs, which is what we're seeing now, the federal regulatory authority is not all that it's cracked up to be. So when my former colleagues in the environmental world say we will never, ever, ever, ever trade the regulations for a carbon price, that's bullshit. They'll trade them in a heartbeat. But they can't say so. They won't say that publicly. And what I do when I talk about this, and one of my former colleagues comes up to me and says, "We will never do that," I say, $100 a ton? Oh, $100 a ton? Yeah, of course we'll trade it. So you just have to be used to that concept. So assuming at some point, either because of the threat of regulation or for divine intervention or whatever else, that industry comes to the table and accepts a price, then you say, okay, no regulation. You either give us a price on carbon or, God forbid, you regulate us. You can't do both. Don't want both. And that's a completely legitimate approach for them to take. So for a robust carbon price, you're going to have to get rid of regulations. Which ones do you get rid of? The answer is you get rid of most of them. The more interesting question are, what are the regulations you keep? And the answer to that is you keep the regulations where what you're regulating doesn't send a price signal. Carbon tax is good for power plants. You don't want to regulate power plants, you just put a carbon tax on them, and all of a sudden, coal is going to have to bid its power in with a lot more. It's going to cost them a lot more, and gas will cost somewhat more, and the renewables cost nothing from a carbon tax. So the power, in terms of whose power gets purchased to send out to the world, a price signal doesn't come through any clearer than in an auction system where the renewables don't have to pay anything for carbon, gas pays this much, and coal pays this much. Price signal, incredibly clear. When you buy a blender, there is no price signal. You're not looking, no one looks at a blender and says, even if they had the information, because I'm not sure the sort of consumer information that you might get on a refrigerator or a washer or dryer about energy comes through on a blender. And certainly the fact that you might be spending $6 a year on electricity for the blender versus $7 a year for that blender, that doesn't affect your decision to buy it. Even though that's actually $6 to $7, that's a 15% increase in power. So it actually has a significant impact in terms of putting all the blenders and the washers and the dryers and the refrigerators, et cetera, together. It's a huge drain on the electrical system. They're big users, but there's no price signal for the consumer, which is why efficiency regulations for appliances make perfect sense. Where else do you keep regulation? Another end user of power, aside from appliances, is cars. Oddly enough, you definitely want to put a carbon price on fuel, on gasoline. But that also doesn't affect buying decisions. Now, if you have a robust carbon price on gasoline that has been in place and will continue to be in place, and everyone can be certain of it, over time, as we've seen in other countries, that will affect buying. And that will affect the marketing of cars. That doesn't affect it right now in the United States. If you go out and does anyone know the average cost of a new car in the United States today? $36,000 is the average new car price in the United States. It's total, it's unweighted. So if you're paying $36,000 for a new car, you're not really thinking about the difference between $800 a year in gasoline costs and $1,000 a year in gasoline costs. It doesn't come through you. No one makes a decision based on that. Not when gasoline costs $2.50 a gallon. If gasoline costs $4 or $5 a gallon, yeah, people would be buying more fuel-efficient cars, but it doesn't cost that much. So until such time as we have a robust price of carbon, that people see at the gas pump this year and next year and the year after, and they know it's going to keep going up. That will not, until that time exists, there is no price signal to people buying cars that should buy more fuel-efficient vehicles. So we would keep standards on appliances, we would keep standards on cars. That's basically the two big categories of end uses that people use. The other place where we keep standards up enough, or not up enough, is pipelines. Because carbon taxes are assessed on the value of the CO2 emitted when you burn things that go through those pipelines. When the natural gas goes through that pipelines and you're taxing the natural gas, you're saying, we're taxing that million cubic feet of natural gas based on CO2 that will be released when you burn. The problem is with pipelines leak, and they don't leak CO2, they leak methane. And methane is a far more potent greenhouse gas. Over the 100-year time frame, it's about 30 times more potent than CO2. And in fact, the pipeline companies do not want to be paying 30 times whatever the carbon price is for their methane leaks. So in fact, if there's a carbon price, the pipeline companies will welcome regulation in lieu of paying that kind of money. Oil pipelines also leak methane. Not as much, but we're building far more gas pipelines these days than oil pipelines. So those are the kind of three major categories of things where we keep the regulation. The one, let's see, what is the missing question here? Let me go back a second and talk about why environmentalists love regulation. They love it because it's worked. The Clean Air Act is why New York City does not look like Beijing. Okay? It's because of the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act works over long periods of time for certain pollutants, endlessly ratcheting down standards. Every 5 years, EPA looks at those standards and tries to ratchet them down further and further. And after decades of doing this, the air gets cleaned up. It doesn't work that well for carbon dioxide. But envirists look at the history of the Clean Air Act and say, God, it's worked. It's why we breathe clean air. Of course it's going to work for CO2. It doesn't work as well for CO2. The other thing envirists like is regulations come from EPA. And envirists have a great love-hate relationship with EPA. And it's a love-hate relationship regardless of who's in the White House. With certain administrations, it's more hate than love. But with others, it's more love, but believe me, a large amount of hate. EPA never does what all the envirists want them to do, but EPA can be relied upon to, if slowly, move the regulatory ball along. And what's more, you can sue EPA to force them to do things. I've lost track of the number of times that I sued EPA to force them to do things that the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act or the law said you have to do. So it's a good way of moving things. Environmentalists are very good at suing EPA and forcing them to do things. And then you can work with the agency, and the agency explains what it does, and you can put in your comments, and you can put in your expert testimony, and you can go meet with the administrator. And then if you don't like the result, you can go to court and challenge it. The environmental groups are unbelievably familiar and comfortable with this process, and that's the process that has led to incredible successes for all the other pollutants under the Clean Air Act. On top of that, it's certain. If a regulation says, you, power plant over there, you're going to reduce your emissions from 2,000 pounds per megawatt hour of power to 1,000 pounds per megawatt hour, it's the law right then and there. And it's certain, you can measure it, and if they don't meet those limits, the environmental groups can sue them. The regulations are enforceable by environmental groups and citizens. So regulations are very attractive to environmental groups. They're certain, They're created by an agency that they've had a 40-year relationship with. They can be enforced by people, by the environmental groups, etc. They are very, very reluctant to give up that system in favor of a carbon tax and a price. So that is one of the preeminent problems that we have, is getting the enviros to pry their fingers off the regulatory policies and move towards a carbon tax. Trying to discuss this issue with them is very, very difficult. There's also a huge psychological issue for environmental groups. If we get a carbon tax, a robust price on carbon, it's $50, $80 a ton, then in some sense we have, God, I hate this word, incentivized the entire economy to reduce carbon. The entire economy is then looking for ways to reduce those costs. What role is there for the environmental groups if the entire economy is geared towards reducing carbon dioxide? Not a lot. Not a lot. And I don't think it's self-preservation in the sense of, oh, my job is on the line. It's a sense of, I have no role anymore. I have put myself out of a business. Regulations, that's a never-ending job. You can be working on regulations, the same regulations for 20 years, and we've done that. But carbon price means that there is no longer a role for the environmental groups to go out there and do the regulatory process that they're so good at. All right, well, I'm going to stop bashing everybody about that one. And I'm just going to point out one more issue with regulation is, so far I've been talking about federal regulations. The states also regulate. And in fact, states have more authority to regulate carbon dioxide than the federal government does. EPA, when it regulates whether it's tailpipes, pipelines, airplane exhaust, or power plants, its regulation has to meet various tests, usually economic and technological feasibility. State regulation doesn't. States have complete plenary authority over smokestacks in their state. If the state of Virginia tomorrow passed a law saying no power plant in the state can emit more than 500 pounds of carbon dioxide per megawatt hour, that's it. Done. Doesn't have to meet any test of technology, doesn't have to meet any test of economic feasibility, don't have to meet no tests whatsoever. So states have enormous regulatory authority, and they've only used it very modestly. But it's an issue for emitters because they want certainty. They want the end of federal regulation if they're going to accept a carbon price. They're also going to want changes to state regulatory authority. Now, gone from trying to limit one set of regulations to trying to limit 50 sets of regulations. No group is more jealous of its regulatory authority than states. The idea of the federal government taking away that authority, whether or not they've used it, is a whole different ball of wax. And we see some states using it quite aggressively, like California, and we see some states using it more modestly, like the RGGI states, by putting a price on carbon and use that authority. But no state wishes to be told that they can't regulate what goes into their air from the smokestacks in their state. They don't like that at all. So we have another political issue is, what do you do with state regulatory authority? And in fact, state pricing authority. So I've now kind of outlined what I think about what are the issues and what are the problems, and now I'm going to do what actually makes the most sense, is ask you what questions you have, because I'm deep into this issue, and I can just keep on talking, but I may not be answering the questions that you have. So please come up to the mic, since I have to use this thing, you're going to use it too. So come up to the mic, ask a question, and I promise, if I don't know the answer, my response is going to be, I don't know. So, sir, please.
I would imagine that the environmentalists would find other toxic things to regulate, such as cadmium and chromium, and they could keep themselves in the regulatory arena by worrying about things other than CO2.
Yes, there is no end of pollutants for them to worry about, but believe me, being a climate warrior is something quite different than being a cadmium warrior. And you're saving the planet versus protecting the citizens of Peoria from the dump that's up the river.
All right, and the more serious question is when the Climate Leadership Council last year brought forth their CO2 plan, they had a long paragraph about regulations that they would omit.
No, I wrote that, and they didn't have a long paragraph about the regulations they would omit. They said most regulations. That was it. Believe me, it says simply the rollback or repeal of.
Well, it was a long paragraph.
I'm sure it was. I'm sure that by the time they finished editing it, there were a lot more words in there. But there was no description of which regulations that were going to be repealed in any way, shape, or form. It just said most. And I still remember talking to Ted Halstead when he sent me a draft and it said repeal all. And I said, that's ridiculous. It has to be most. And we changed it. And that's what
would.
Excuse me. Right. Repeal, phase out, reduce, etc.
If you were to revise the CCL proposal, would you include a similar statement that some number of regulations would be phased out?
Yes, I don't work for. Well, I'm sorry, I'm getting confused with CLC and CCL. Yes, CCL. I would tell my friends at Citizens Climate Lobby that yes, you should very carefully go through and think about which regulations you think are proper and which regulations you think can be put on the table. That makes you a much more credible negotiator than going in and saying, I want a carbon price and I don't want to talk about regulations.
So, I used to be on the Sierra Clubs. There's trees to be saved, there's a lot of things to do. So they'll keep busy. Trust me. When we talk to our members of Congress and they say, well, will this remove regulations? And we say, well, yes, of course. And they say, well, when and how? How do we answer that?
Well, first of all, congratulations that you have a congressman who's willing to get into the weeds because 99% of them have no idea what they're talking about.
Well, I'm from Omaha. We have Don Bacon. Everything goes better with bacon.
Okay.
He's on the Climate Solution Caucus.
I'm delighted that he's joined the Climate Solution Caucus. The answer is you can do what I said and say, listen, simply the ones where no price signal comes through, cars and appliance standards and pipelines, those three right there are probably the three most important I can think of. Now I'll glance over real expert in the audience. Am I getting all three? Okay, good. Yes, use those three as examples and say these are the type of things where we keep regulation. Price signal doesn't come through, or we're not regulating with methane. We're not pricing it for the methane. We're pricing it for the CO2. Yes, ma'am.
I have a quick clarification to ask you. When you said the two energy didn't look for carbon dioxide to regulate dioxide emissions, is it because they have to regulate every single source of transportation?
Yes, it works. It works for cars because you can set a standard for cars that reduces their CO2 emissions, and you build a fleet of cars.
That's already there because California says the.
Yes, because California, thank God, has that authority. Which is why we are all driving more fuel, or can drive more fuel-efficient cars. But it doesn't work because of the source category by source category by source category. New standards, existing plant standards, litigation, changes in administration. I mean, this is the 10-year anniversary of Massachusetts versus EPA that gave EPA the regulatory authority. And for 8 years, Barack Obama was in the White House, and we don't have squat. We have the Clean Power Plan, which is now dead, and that's it. That's it. That was the only federal regulatory program that came out of the Obama administration, with the exception of, pipeline methane, and that's been killed already by the new administration. And Clean Power Plan is next.
Just to follow up, for the states, so there's a line of thinking. If one or two states initiate a carbon tax, maybe it will have this snowball effect, or maybe it will make it easier to go for a national price, because at least at those states level, it will show that it doesn't shrink economy. On the contrary, it will boost. So, what is your position?
It would be great to see robust carbon pricing in states. There are two problems. One, the RGGI states have a $3 a ton carbon price. That doesn't scare anybody. Doesn't RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, it's in 9 northeastern states. And they're charging $3 a ton, which is ludicrous. California is charging $13 a ton. That has somewhat more of an impact. Until you get robust prices coming out of the states, you're not going to succeed. The problem with states is, and I was out in California last week talking to folks about this, California puts a $50 a ton price on carbon. Okay? And you've got, let's say, a cement plant in California, and you're paying $50 a ton for that.
Arizona.
The stuff that's coming in from Nevada and Oregon, et cetera, they're not paying $50 a ton. All of a sudden, your products, your energy-intensive products, are in deep, deep trouble. And so it's very hard for states to go for robust pricing on a lot of things, because the manufacturing people who are energy-intensive want to then leave the state. So, sir.
Change from one regime to another. There's always a question, and we with the devil's in the details of the question of the transition. How would you suggest transitioning from a regulatory environment to a price environment, unless you come in initially very, very high price? In phase-in, which is what we talked about, how do you prevent the low price tax temporarily, not preventing emitters from just living?
Don't sign the deal. Don't give up the regs unless you have a price you can live with it. And
how do you do it? What's the
transition
transition?
is a very fine-tuned detail as to how quickly you ramp in the price and which regulations you suspend or cap or whatever. That, I promise you, if we ever get to that point, I'm going to be spending weeks working on tiny little details about that. But the big issue, and I've told environmental groups this repeatedly, your role is to say that is an adequate carbon price at which we can stop trying to regulate. But if the price isn't adequate, don't sign the deal.
I was just going to say, unless you can't ignore those details.
Oh, no.
And it's
got
to be decided beforehand. Normally, that is where the real fight.
Oh, God, yes. That'll be, sleeves rolled
That's
up.
the next 10 years of fight.
Yeah, no, it won't. That will be a detail worked out. If there's ever a federal carbon price that comes out of Congress, that will be worked out late at night with staff, with a lot of people sitting around the room, and empty pizza boxes, and everyone will be extremely tired and grumpy, but that's how it will get worked out.
Usually.
Yeah. There you go. Sir.
Really enjoyed your talk. And I come from West Virginia, where the fossil fuel industry is supreme. And I was just wondering, without the incentives that the fossil fuel industry, extractive industry gets, what would the price of their products be compared to the way they are now with the incentives?
In other words, you're asking about, are you talking about like federal tax subsidies?
All of them. All of the fuel subsidies.
Oh, this is again something that gets me into a lot of trouble. which is that there aren't a lot of federal subsidies for fossil fuels. There are some, but most of the federal subsidies for fossil fuels are the same subsidies that go for all manufacturing industries. There just aren't that many direct subsidies for coal or oil or gas.
Earlier in one of the work sessions, it was brought up that the fossil fuel industry enjoys 4 times the incentives that the renewable energy industry.
I would doubt it, except if they put into that category, which is what the World Bank does when they say they're $18 trillion a year. They simply say almost all of that is we are not charging the fossil fuel manufacturer for the health effects.
Right. Okay.
We don't.
Right.
Yeah, that's
where they get it.
That's where the subsidy is. Yes, you don't charge coal companies for the health effects of breathing.
But maybe we should.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole nother question.
Hello, thank you so much. My name is Bruce Hagan. I'm from Northern California, and I've been involved with clean energy stuff for the better part of my life. And when I first heard about the carbon tax, fee, and dividend, I thought the environmental groups, and particularly the clean energy industry, Solar Energy Industries Association, companies and such, that they would just jump right behind it. But what I've been finding and working on for several years now is trying to convince them that they're going to be better off with a proposal like CLCs or CCLs than they will with continuing to have to fight the investment tax credit battle every X number of years. And aside from the broader consideration of subsidies and all for fossil fuels, I'm wondering, have you given any thought to what effect this might have in trying to get those companies upon whom we're going to rely to make this conversion from high emission to a low emission economy, how to get them on board with this politically?
I'm not sure what your question is. How do you get
the clean energy industry to support a price on carbon?
You set it at a price high enough to drive out gas in favor of renewables. If you have it at $30 a ton, it doesn't do the renewables guys a whit of good.
So really what I've heard most recently actually from Danny Richter is that we need to actually do some math on at what point does the CCO proposal deliver more competitive advantage to clean energy than the existing investment tax credit, and at that point...
That's exactly correct. And the last time I looked at these numbers, it was like $60 or $70 a ton is what's needed when you're bidding power around the country. You're bidding into hour-by-hour auctions. If you have a $70 a ton carbon price, that favors the renewable companies over the gas companies. Less than that, it doesn't do them any good.
So if we pass our bill, or when we pass our bill this year, it'll be 5 or 6 years before the benefit of carbon fee will be greater than the existing investment tax credit.
Well, the investment tax credit dies pretty much after 2020.
Well, and they want to extend it, and they don't want to expend political capital on something that's not going to be as good for them as the investment tax credit. So that's the dilemma. Advice?
Everybody loves to get their benefits from Congress, and the renewable industry got theirs, but I don't think there's a lot of stomach even among them to come back after they got a bipartisan deal saying this is it, and it runs out, and that's it. And the solar and wind guys said, that's it, we agree, we're not going to come back to you guys. They would be in a terrible position if they came back and said, whoops, we were wrong, we need more subsidies.
No, they were talking about it would be repealed in 3 years rather than let it extend all the way till the current expiration date.
That's in 3 years.
Pardon?
That's in 3 years. 3 years is 2020 is when.
Then they'll get it repealed in a year or whenever it was. It's the idea for supporting carbon tax. They're afraid of it because they think they're going to lose something that they fought hard to gain. So
okay, well, we will see what our friends in Congress do. Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you so much. I'm Shannon from the National Wildlife Federation. And,
Excellent.
And this has been a terrific discussion. I really appreciate you doing this. I appreciate CCL having this fantastic discussion. It's very helpful, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying. It really resonates with me. We're trying to have similar sorts of conversations. We're one of those groups that talks to the environmental community, talks to sort of center right and right groups, and kind of in the middle of an awkward place. But it's good. But I did have a question along the lines of, I noticed that when you were talking about federal regulation and what to trade, you referred to them as regulations. And then when you talked about states, it was state authority. And in my mind, I see them as
My mistake.
different.
It should
So
be
could you
authority.
clarify? In
It's
both cases.
authority, yes, in both cases. It's not specific regulations, it's authority. Sorry.
So a follow-up question then on the federal side, just adding to that nervousness, but in this case, I admit I have this nervousness too. If you do away with certain authorities, do you potentially lose your opportunity or your ability, rather, to treat some sort of unpredictable climate catastrophe in the future? Do we need to maintain some sort of underlying authority if the tax is just never going to get high enough to do what we need to do quick enough, although it does seem like we work a hell of a lot better and quicker than regulations? Do we need to maintain something there for the what ifs if science tells us something?
That's an excellent question because it relates to, do you tie the price to emissions targets?
Right.
In other words, here's the emissions trajectory we want, actually going like this, and the price, we set a price, and if after time the emissions are going down, leave the price alone, and if the emissions are not going down, the price goes up, and it'll force the emissions down. That's would be the way I would structure a federal carbon price. It's not necessarily the way Congress is going to wind up structuring a federal carbon price. Yours is the flip side, which is, do we have regulatory authority if there's a very bad climate thing? You could say if there was all of a sudden a 1 degree Fahrenheit spike in temperature over 2 years or something like that. My concern about that is that if we have things like that happening, talk about closing the barn door. I mean, yeah, you could start regulating again, but what good is it going to do if what's already up in the air is causing that sort of change? Well, it's a completely legitimate idea. I just think practically I'm not sure it would do that much good, and politically people would see it, they still want to cling to the regulations, but it's a completely legitimate idea.
Have you thought about building a relationship with a group other than the environmentalists, like AARP, using some of the tax money for healthcare? And I have a second question.
Nope. When it comes, we're standing here in an event organized by the Citizens Climate Lobby, and they believe that the spend side should be 100% rebate. And that's fine. I don't care. I literally don't care about the spend side. And when it comes to a federal carbon tax, you start throwing $100, $200 billion a year of new spending at Congress, there are going to be 535 people engaged in the biggest food fight you have ever seen in your lives. The idea that you're going to get this through Congress without A, buying votes, and B, just not everyone else having a better idea of what to do with it, I don't see that happening. But there are a lot of good uses for the money, and excellent proposals have put forward that no matter what you do, you have to protect the bottom 30% of income earners. That they have to be made whole for their. You can't, otherwise, it becomes too aggressive a tax. Whether or not that's what Congress will do, I don't know. I really don't. But that's going to be another huge fight that everyone better roll up their sleeves. The environs have to figure out what's the right price at which they give up the regs, and everybody else has to figure out where does that money go.
A lot of states have renewable fuel standards. In theory, they could be carbon-free fuel standards. That's driving at least the electricity market because the states have these goals. Is there any way to go about reducing carbon another way for now with the states, with their renewable fuel standards, or influence them to be carbon-free? Because then you allow for new technology with coal, breakthroughs with nuclear, what have you.
State renewable portfolio standards or renewable energy standards are a really interesting mechanism. First of all, because how do states define what is renewable? And it doesn't include some zero carbon technologies like nuclear. California at least doesn't include large hydro. It has to be less than 30 megawatts to be considered renewable. Probably the biggest one are the nukes. And they're yelling, hey, we're zero carbon and we're getting completely pressed out of this game. We're getting shoved out by the low price of gas, which has led two states to now create charges to subsidize nuclear power, Illinois and New York, which means in New York State there are actually three separate prices on carbon. People burning fossil fuels in New York pay $3 a ton for their carbon. All the utilities that have to meet the renewable portfolio standard pay $24 a ton for renewable energy certificates, and all the ratepayers are paying $42 a ton for the carbon-free emissions from the nuclear plants. One state, three wildly different carbon prices varying in more than an order of magnitude. It's pretty screwed up. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. There's litigation in both cases. Meanwhile, other states are beginning to look at this, although Connecticut did not subsidize its nuclear plants. They were, as of last week, that bill died. But Pennsylvania's thinking about doing it. Ohio's thinking about doing it. And guess what? Ohio's also thinking about saying, hold it. We're subsidizing nuclear plants because they have zero carbon and are base load. Why don't we subsidize the coal plants, which are base load power, even though they have carbon? It's turning into a free-for-all, and it's not clear how this is going to end. It's certainly that a lot of it's going to be determined by the courts. A lot of it's going to be determined by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and some of it may be determined by Congress.
So the administration has certainly started the multi-year process of deconvoluting and getting supposedly zeroing out the Clean Power Plan.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still the endangerment finding.
Oh, yeah.
And Scott Pruitt certainly knows he doesn't have a hope in hell of reversing that. And as long as the EPA under the Clean Air Act is mandated to deal with CO2 as a pollutant, they have to do something, and it also has to be meaningful. They can't just do some token thing or accept that. Can you give us your view on that?
I've sued EPA a lot of times to make them do things, and I don't think I've ever come across the word meaningful. Yes, the endangerment finding is there, thank God, and there are mandatory duties. But guess what? In 2008, the Bush administration had been sued because they hadn't looked at the emission standards for refineries in many, many, many years. And they came out with a proposed rule, and the environment said, hold it, there's no standard in here for CO2. Where's the CO2 standard? And the Bush administration said, oh, when we redo our standards, as we're required to do every 5 years, we don't have to look at new pollutants. We are legally required only to look at pollutants we previously regulated. Everybody sued. In that case, was administratively parked in the DC Circuit for 8 years under the Obama administration, and they never reversed that finding. That is still the law of the land. So in fact, for us to regulate, let's say, steel mills, which have not had a CO2 standard, we're going to have to start from scratch. Petition the agency saying CO2 under the endangerment finding is a bad thing. If this source emits it, you have to start the regulatory process.
Are you just saying that the process is going to be so long and unwieldy that it effectively amounts to nothing?
Absolutely.
Even though the law says they have a mandate.
Yep.
I like your presentation, and I agree with your basic premise that some regulations can be diluted, but we got two categories like the economy. First of all, efficiency regulations are not just the obvious ones on appliances and automobiles, but for example, building codes, which there's thousands of. And so if we really look at how efficiency regulations are embedded in all kinds of other codes throughout the U.S., I think many of those are still...
Stop right there. Building codes are state and locally done. And that's another excellent place for where you want to keep standards if Congress starts preempting. But absolutely correct. State building codes, enormously important. State lighting codes, enormously important for energy savings.
The second category that I'd like to address is if we put a tax on carbon, all those climate change pollutants that are not carbon may require other regulations. Is that true?
Yes, there are two ways of doing that. Some of them are amenable to an equivalent carbon price. Some of them are not amenable to a carbon price, and that goes. You've got to go through the list. As I said, methane leaks from pipelines. You can't do a carbon price for them. But HFCs, sure, if you can tax them with the manufacturing facility, you could do that. But that's a pollutant by pollutant issue.
So then, what I would say is the word that bothered me the most, although I agree with your basic premise, is the idea most. If you add up all the efficiency regulations, how they permeate through all of our regulations at state level, and then all the other regulations for all the non-greenhouse gases, all those things, I think that instead of using the word that most regulations should be deleted, maybe I would prefer some or many, but not most, because I don't think that is most of them. So that might avoid confusion downstream. People might be reading that to say, well, we can get rid of all these things.
No, I would trim my language or amend my language to say most federal regulation. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Please.
I just want to make sure I heard correctly what you're saying.
No, I deny it. I never said that. I never said that, and I'll tweet to that effect.
I thought I heard you say that methane pipeline regulations were on their way out, but didn't the Senate just vote to keep them?
Those are the Bureau of Land Management's methane regulations on federal land, on oil and gas exploration on federal land, and those were enacted under the rubric of, hey, that methane belongs to the U.S. taxpayers. We're allowing people to extract it, but they should be paying royalties on that. And these regulations to control that methane are a cost-saving thing for the U.S. taxpayers. They really weren't done under the guise of methane is bad, and that's how you managed to get 3 Republicans to say, okay, fine, we'll go along with that. But the methane, all the gas pipelines in the United States, oil and gas pipelines, that EPA had come out finally with a regulation, that one's dead. That Congress killed that in the Congressional Review Act.
But I heard you correctly. You think that's an area where we really do need to have.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the only way you can deal with pipelines is by regulation.
So somehow we have to redo.
You have to get a new president is what you have to do.
Hi. So you mentioned earlier that we should consider specific regulatory practices and figure out the differences between those. And I was just wondering if you had any good, viable, comprehensive resources you'd recommend us.
No, I pretty much shot my mouth off about that one. In terms of, you want to do the efficiency stuff, whether it's appliances or lighting or building codes, etc. Those are terrific. You want to keep standards for tailpipes until such time as the public is used to the idea that gasoline is expensive and it's going to keep getting more expensive. At that point, you could probably stop regulating tailpipes because the market will take over for you. And as I said, methane from pipelines. But otherwise, that's probably most of them. I'm sure somewhere deep in my notes I've got a bunch of other ones, but please don't try to embarrass me any further.
Thanks for your comments. And one question I have is, I'm a doctor and I deal with behavior change all the time, and it seems to me that the purpose of carbon price is to accomplish behavior change through our entire economy, because that's the kind of massive change we need to prevent climate change from running away from us. Otherwise, by the time we are done writing all the regulations, it'll be 2100 and too late. So my question is, if we accomplish carbon price, has anyone totaled up the actual cost of enforcing all the regulations and writing all the regulations and keeping track of them that will eventually be outdated by or made moot by a carbon price, and and say, well, look, there are all these potential savings by downsizing agencies that are just, counting all the units of pollution now, it will be moot. And we can say, point to legislators, well, this will also save money in the regulatory system.
That is, part of that's the basic trade-off. Regulations are costlier. They are a more costly way to get emissions reductions than a carbon price, and it's bad economics. No one has tried to calculate what would be the economic cost of trying to regulate our way down to significant amounts of CO2 reduction, because it's simply, you would need huge regulatory schemes. It boggles the mind. The problem is that the Trump administration is getting rid of the regulations we have today. There's nothing hanging over industry at this point. They have no incentive, zero incentive to come to the table with the Trump administration regulatory hammer. The real issue isn't the difference between Barack Obama's climate policy and Donald Trump's climate policy. The real issue is the difference between Donald Trump's and what Hillary Clinton's would have been. If she had been elected, the Environmental Protection Agency was well underway in dealing with Clean Power Plan 2.0. The existing Clean Power Plan was written in order to get a template out there, start a system, but it was written with very, very modest greenhouse gas emissions goals. You're all aware of that half the states are saying we're already in compliance. Industry, the utilities are going, hey, we can comply with this. The big issue was the legal threats. And if you're going to take a case to the Supreme Court, you want it to be, hey, it's illegal, rather than it's illegal and it's technologically and economically impossible to achieve. It makes it much easier for the court to say, get rid of it. But if the issue is just legality, that's pretty straightforward. Clean Power Plan 2.0, if the Supreme Court got the case, and if it had said this is legal, then you could turn the regulatory screws. Then you could really ratchet down those targets. And then ideally, a lot of us were thinking, hey, sometime towards the end of Hillary Clinton's first term, we're going to be seeing active negotiations on the carbon tax. That one gets filed into the land of, make-believe, never, who knows.
And maybe this is a longer term given your lay of the land right now, but can you give us a lay of the land in terms of the politics of offering up that trade of regulations for a carbon price? And I think you presented, here's where the Enviro groups stand, but is there an advisable political strategy you have of who initiates that and where to sit for a group like CID's Climate Lobby to make sure that when that trade happens, it ends up with the strongest price possible?
For the next 4 years, the only pathways that I can imagine for a carbon tax are fiscal. Do they need carbon tax revenue to pay for tax reform? You can call that tax cuts, you can call it tax whatever, but they use a carbon tax to justify cutting corporate and personal income taxes, or do they use a carbon tax to finance infrastructure? The minute a carbon tax is on the floor or in committee being talked about as a finance mechanism, you bet that conversation will start in a heartbeat. Everyone will be at the table. Once a member of Congress, particularly a Republican member of Congress, says, we need a carbon tax in order to finance tax or infrastructure, that conversation will start immediately. You won't have to wait for someone to go first. Everyone will be rushing in there. Industry will rush in and say, well, fine, you want a carbon tax, get rid of all these regs. Keep all the regs, and then the negotiations will start. But someone, a Republican in Congress, must lay it down as we need this, never for a climate measure. we need this for tax cuts, or we need this for paying for infrastructure.
I really enjoyed your talk.
1 second, how are we doing in time? Okay, fine, we're doing fine.
Thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed it. You talked about the importance of keeping regulations for methane leaks from pipes.
Great.
I was wondering, have you put any thought into what should be done about methane from livestock?
Oh, okay. Yes, I have. And immediately, there's an old phrase in Washington, which is ag always wins. Ag always wins. There is no way in hell we're going to be able to regulate or tax methane emissions from livestock. I wish it were otherwise. It's the same. A ton from a cow is the same.
Cow farts.
Nope, it's cow burps.
Oh, burps. You're right.
Please make sure you know which end of the cow we're dealing with.
No, but that was the original study, I believe, when it came out. People were talking. That's how they derived it.
No, yeah, and there have been some experiments in places like New Zealand where there's some sheep changing feed and changing probiotic solutions and stuff like that. That's fine. But in the United States, as a matter of public policy, you will never, ever, ever be able to put a price on carbon emissions from livestock. Ain't happening politically. Wish it were otherwise. I'm not going to try and die on that hill, believe me.
You kind of confirmed my suspicions.
Sure.
Hello. So obviously CCL's proposal doesn't stop at the borders, and there will be tariffs implemented. So I wanted to clarify the status of regulations for goods that were being outsourced, imported into the U.S.
In other words, if you're taxing the emissions of a ton of steel made in the United States and you have a border adjustment saying a ton of steel coming from China, you tax it the same amount. Yeah. We don't do that with regulatory issues. We simply say, if it's made in the United States, you're regulated. If it's made over there, we don't regulate carbon emissions overseas. So taxation is an effective way of a border adjustment of getting to overseas sources. But regulation is not. Sure.
Hey there. I guess I was wondering. So I tend to travel in more progressive circles. So I hear a lot about the flack that carbon pricing advocates are getting for even considering trading these regulations. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about if there's been any public discussions. I haven't been able to find any conservatives about like interest in making that, or if you have any thoughts on what in slightly more concrete terms we might gain. The one thing I did manage to find was from Grover Norquist saying, now that the GOP can repeal all the anti-energy and anti-job regs, the left offers to trade those regs for a carbon tax. Nice try. So I guess I wondered if there's more interest from others, and if you could speak to
you had a panel here before about conservatives and making the case to conservatives, and there's several groups in Washington. I worked for one, for the Scannon Center. I went from Sierra Club to a libertarian think tank, with some stops in between. But there are several. There's Republic EN, which is Bob Inglis's group. They do excellent work. There's the R Street Institute, which is another libertarian think tank, which doesn't do a lot of active work, but believes in the carbon price and trading regulations for them. They're out there, and the Climate Leadership Council, which had Halstead's group with lots of Republican heavyweights, and they also say.
I guess I wonder, my mind is a little bit more towards Republicans in Congress or other folks who
they don't talk about carbon taxes. They
sure.
don't. We've had to handhold those guys to the point where you can get a bunch of them into something called the Climate Solutions Caucus, where all they're willing to talk about is, well, it's a problem. It's a problem. It's more like the Climate Problem Acknowledgement Caucus. They have not thought of a solution. And, as I said, wait for the day when a Republican throws down a carbon tax bill and says, we got to do something about this, then you will have made progress. But so far, none. Thank you. You're welcome. Back to you, sir. Excellent. We've come full circle.
Number two. I was wondering with the methane leaks, I'm wondering what, I'm fairly confident that the industry measures how much they're leaking into the environment. Maybe not accurately.
Until last Friday, that was correct. The monitoring and reporting obligations of the methane rule were unilaterally canceled by Scott Pruitt last Friday when the Enviro report. Either they canceled on Thursday, they report on Friday, or they canceled on Friday and report today.
So they can used to measure them, could again measure them. If they're measuring the leaks, then why couldn't we tax the leaks?
Two things. One, measuring leaks from hundreds of thousands of miles of pipelines and tens of thousands of compressor stations, etc., is an enormously difficult task, and you're not going to be. You can extrapolate those results and say the whole system is acting this way. We'll take this 5% randomly, monitor it, and we'll say, okay, now we'll extrapolate that to here. That's great for a regulatory system. Saying we're going to take this 5% and tax the rest of you based on these leaks over here. Oh, no. They're going to say, you monitor my stuff and tell me if I'm leaking. So the monitoring doesn't work very well for that. And as I said, in any event, industry would prefer being regulated to being taxed on it. They don't want to pay the kinds of money. A $50 a ton carbon tax is $1,500 is $1,500 a ton for methane. They don't want to pay that.
So how do you regulate them to stop leaking? I just don't understand.
What you do is you say you have to install the following types of equipment. It's equipment mandates. You must install this kind of compressor that has this kind of leak rate, that has this kind of that on it, and you have certain monitoring. You must monitor this compressor state, and you must monitor X number of miles using this technique or that technique. You must do it this frequently or that frequently. That's how you do a regulatory system for that. Doesn't really work for taxation, unfortunately. Okay, one more question before I'm getting the time, and I'll hang around and chat with people if they'd like. Please.
So, I would just, my question is, I need help understanding how border tax rebates should work. Is the rebate given to just all exported goods, or is it only to countries that already have their own carbon pricing, or how does that work?
That's a very good question. Right now, it's the rebate programs are based on we're not going to charge for products made here, emissions made here that we then send overseas because our products become non-competitive. So it's a purely economic decision. However, if they are being sent to a country that also has a carbon tax, well, hell, we're going to let them collect the carbon tax. We'll keep the carbon tax. The manufacturer doesn't care. They either pay it to us or they pay it to them. We'll keep it here, which is why a border tax works for other countries. If we say we're going to tax your goods coming in, they go, well, why should we give the money to the United States government? We'll just tax the goods here at home. So the short answer to your question is it's rebated on exports to countries that don't have a carbon tax, and it's retained for countries that do have a carbon tax. Okay, that's it for me. So enjoy yourselves, and thank you.